We're going to continue our discussion on fragility and addressing sometimes what we often think of as our major barrier to math improvement across a system, a school, but also long lasting as we traction, sustainability. Like sometimes we often think that time is one of our biggest barriers, or if we think, buy-in is our biggest barrier with teachers. But our biggest barrier, and this is, remember, a continuation from the previous episode where we unpacked that barrier, but also we gave one tip, on how to address that barrier for a long-lasting plan, which we were talking about codification and that. And this one, we're going to kind of extend that to think about some other ideas and practical ideas to address this fragility barrier, which is really, really restating that it's not time, it's not buy-in with teachers, really, that's preventing us. It's what happens if the person leading the work leaves or switches roles. And what we're seeing, and what from your own school or school district, is that if you're that person, if the math program lives with you right now, and you retire, or you go back to the classroom, or you step into, say, to a new department, that it's going to be halted, or all of a sudden things are going to come to a screeching halt, and all the work that you've been working on is like the person coming in all of a sudden has to start from scratch. And that right there is one of the hugest barriers we're all up against for long-lasting, sustainable improvement, because that person now has to go what were we doing? And then now I have to catch up to the learning there, even just to continue. And we have halting. And what really happens is they just throw everything out and go what should we do now? Here's my plan. And then this is where teachers start to see, well, this is a different thing added to my plate. Whatever we did last year doesn't matter. It's like we just keep switching focuses, and we're doing the spaghetti at the wall approach. It just perpetuates that myth that's what improvement is at schools, and us district office people are not trusting when it comes to classroom teachers. So we want to talk about that here today. We're going to be kind of unpacking some case studies, some practical examples that we've been sharing with our teams, but also from our teams and the work that they've been doing. Yvette, let's dig in. Where do you want to start first?
I was actually thinking, as you were describing or introducing this idea, that I also want to say that, sometimes change is good. Like sometimes having the same person in the same role for 10 years, it's it becomes stagnant, or we should be getting diverse perspectives. And I think that sometimes with change comes opportunity. But what we don't want is for those changes to continuously happen, and then they disrupt the system. And so it's like, what do we have to put in place systemically so that even though a new perspective or a new voice can invigorate or inspire, it doesn't halt or disrupt or upend the work we've been doing for the past few years? And I can think about two things, and I'm sure, on Monday we touched on these and we'll go a little bit deeper, but top of mind for me is that idea of distributed leadership or shared ownership of this work, that, our job as a leader is to build other leaders. And so we have actually a district we talked about recently who's doing a really great job at this right now. It's a single coordinator who oversees, let's say, math for grades 6 through 12. And they've recognized, right? Like, I can't be the one leading this work. I need my instructional mentors on the team. I need my department chairs on the team. And these are people who could potentially step into the role if I walk away. And we all have a same vision for what we want to see happening 5 years from now. And the other piece is those systems. So it's how do we leverage PLCs? What does professional learning look like? And if we create a culture or a system of ways that we're leveraging our subsystems that is teachers' own, and it's teachers are living and breathing these structures because they're just part of our common practice in the way that we do business, it's really hard to disrupt them. Mm-hmm. So I think those are, two ways that we have to talk about sustainability, is that idea of shared ownership and distributed decision-making and leadership, but then also structures that even if the plan adjusts, they're going to hold.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll start with the structures and the plans, because we talked about that on the Monday episode about how do we codify the work we're doing? How do we make it part of what we do here? And how do we systematize professional development? How do we systematize the learning that we can carry forward, so it's not just isolated, or it's not just like these blips that all of a sudden are there and then they're gone, and how do we capture them, and how do we make it part of our systems? I think it's very meta, I think when we think about professional development, we think about, holding professional development sessions, running a workshop, leading a PLC. And what I mean by the meta part is like thinking about like, are we taking time to unpack what the structure actually is and why we're doing it the way we're doing it with the people we're leading? Because that's the part I think that can build the culture and the fabric of how we can sustain the work that you're trying to do. So for example, like you're making conscious decisions about how to link your PD sessions, your full out PD sessions at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, with your PLCs that you're maybe helping support at individual schools, and maybe you're helping principals set appropriate school level goals. And all three of those things seem separate, but you're making a conscious choice there to support those three pieces. But are you bringing those teachers, those administrators into the fold of like, this is our plan and here's why we're doing what we're doing. We're doing this because of this reason. It supports this goal. But the structure itself, let's talk about the benefits of the structure itself and teach your teams, teach your people that the reasons you make these decisions, because we have to pass that on. Like, that's how we have to say, like, this is how we do PD there. We start with our goal. We start looking at our subsystems. We think about like, how do we align these subsystems? We have to teach others the learning that we have about that, which is like passing that system on and documenting that system is like, that's the system part that I think we all forget about or we don't think about. We just think about giving PD or holding sessions to teachers because that's what we're after. But I mean, if you're not building leaders, you're not going to pass this on. It's just going to halt. And I think that's the part that we have to think about, internalize, is to say, like, are we answering that question as well?
So what I heard you say is we need to bring people, and you've said this before, like to the inside. Like, help them see why decisions were made, not just the result of those decisions. Like, don't allow it just for them to experience it as like a recipient of this system or these, this learning, but actually let them in on the inside. Like, let them know why we're doing what we're doing and thinking behind it, so that we can understand, why this system is going to serve us long term. It doesn't seem totally random or, there's a lot of intention. I think the other part that we talked about is, and like, I've heard this before, right? It's like, you're always bringing people up behind you. So like, if you step into a coaching role, you're working with teachers and you're looking for like, who are the next coaches? Like, who are the people that could step into my role if I was to go, off on a leave tomorrow, or I was to transition to another board? If I'm a curriculum coordinator, I'm like, okay, well, who are the coaches, or who are the instructional mentors, or who are the bright spot teachers that I could bring into the conversation, that I could be building their capacity, knowing that at some point there's going to be a transition. And we've seen some of our districts do this really well. We have a few really shining examples. One actually that just transitioned this year. The person who was leading the team of coaches went on to a role at the province level, at the ministry. But we don't anticipate any disruption to the work because everybody else on the team was on the inside. There weren't decisions being made behind closed doors. People were, and although it can be messy at times and it can maybe take a little bit longer to land on a decision, it's like people were privy to the information. They were part of the decision-making process. They've deeply internalized the vision and the work and the objectives and the plan for this year. And so that work is going to continue because there is already distributed leadership amongst the team. And knowing that at some point this transition may happen, knowing that there were people that could easily step into the role.
Yeah. Like they're shining example, like you said, shining example of, and you said distributive leadership, which is research from James Spillane that we've, brought into our system and helped share how we can be applying that research into math, specifically math improvement. In that idea of distributed leadership is about bringing people into the inside. There's another book that we've referenced here on the podcast, which was called All In by Mike Michalowicz, which was about like, how do I bring people and treat, how do I get more people to treat the work like they own it? And I think like all these ideas and that speak to that is like, how do I give them like not only like psychological safety, which I like a lot of people talk about with terms of like teams. I was like, I'm working with a team. I want to make sure there's psychological safety to like speak your mind, because that's how we're going to grow and we're going to get better. And it's like, okay, so I think that's been spread around a lot, but from All In, he talked about like, you need more than that, which was psychological ownership. Like you have to, in the act of creating psychological ownership is exactly what James Spillane is saying in distributed leadership, which is saying, which is saying we got to bring people into the fold and give them the inside info. We've got to share how we make decisions with them so that they feel like they can own the work, but then they also are in place to continue the work. And that shining example, you're right. Like they had a great year last year of like doing some really great alignment in the work that they were doing, and then all of a sudden, boom, unexpected. The leader of that team steps away because it's another opportunity that served them, and somebody from that team stepped up and took that spot. Because we've also seen what typically you hear. Not these are teams that we were talking to initially, and this is, you heard of horror stories, but it's like you've got a team that did work all year, and all of a sudden that person switches roles. All of a sudden they go back to being in the classroom, and this one I'm thinking about, they went to be a principal and stepped away from the math coordinator role, and everything was. And they passed it to a team, and they said, "Hey, here's the work I'm doing. Here's the documents I was working on. Here's our vision for math that we had built, and here's some objectives. But we haven't, there was no one else, or there was no team, or there was no like distributive leadership happening there to bring people into the fold." And then that person was like, "I don't know." Like they didn't. It's almost like they didn't have the learning that other person did about the importance of how they structured their PD. And not about the what, right? The what is a completely different story. It was like how they were doing the PD that fell through the cracks. And then it was almost like that's where the spaghetti at the wall started to happen again.
One particularly difficult scenario that we've seen in some of the districts that we support is what happens when the boss leaves. The person with the decision-making authority who oversees the direction of the entire department, who determines the priorities, and all of a sudden that superintendent, that director leaves, and somebody brand new comes in with new ideas, new experiences, new priorities, a new vision for the department.
For sure. Like this is common. Like how many people are saying like, we know that the transition's happening because the person's announced their retirement, so everything's on hold. We're not going to do anything until we know what this person can help us direct. And so yeah, that's like our threat to the work that we're doing. Like, is everything going to be upended, or is all the teachers that I've been working with going to see like, oh, now we got new things to do, because who knows what they're going to decide, and they weren't involved. Like, where's the passing at that point of like the work? You'd hope that the new leader stepping in is going to be like, well, I'm going to honor work that's happened here, and I'm going to like assess what's important and what maybe not important. And I'm going to say like, where are we with these things? And instead of just saying like, let's just start all over, you'd hope that was the case of a new leader being a leader. But also like the same thing can happen when that leader decides they're going to switch focuses anyway, right? Like we've heard a lot of that from our math coordinators, our math coaches, who are like, well, I don't want to do that because I don't want to get railroaded. And I think there's that worry. It's like, but the worry is because we haven't included what is the team. We've talked about that before too, about co-elevation. It's like co-elevation is thinking about their principles of like leading without authority. It's like, if I'm here and the boss leaves or the boss changes their mind, it's like, but who are my surrounding people? Who are the people that I can bring into the ecosystem to help us achieve our work? And the more people I can bring into that fold, and I know that like they're not my direct, I'm not directly supporting them like teachers. It could be people across the hall in the district office. It could be principals in buildings. But it's like, who are these people that can also speak the same language and work on the same things? Because the more people in that circle, the harder it is to shift priorities and shift focuses. Because this is the way we do it, right? Like, if this is the way we do it, all of a sudden it's harder for anyone to say like, let's completely change, and whether they're new or not. And I know there's like the other ideas, and I want you to comment on this, is like, who are those accountable people that we can bring into the fold if we're not sure exactly who to bring in?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I was thinking of the same thing. I was like, who are the important voices that need to be a part of this conversation throughout the process, that there is this shared ownership? And my reaction when I pondered this question leading into our conversation today was, what if we've made a commitment though for 3 years? Like, what if we have communicated publicly to our staff, to our stakeholders, including parents and community partners, if we have a board of trustees or any elected officials, we've communicated to our community that this is the work and this is the commitment that we're making for the next 3 to 5 years. I wonder if that accountability adds an extra layer of pressure, or just, an extra layer of, well, if we deviate now from this plan, we're breaking trust. We're breaking trust with our teachers, we're breaking trust with our parents, we're breaking trust with the public. And is just that extra layer of like, if we say we're going to do this work, we want to engage our community partners because this is shared work. We're all committed to strengthening these outcomes for students collectively. And now all of a sudden next year, the plan's thrown out and we're moving on to something different. I think there is, a lack of accountability, and we may be breaking trust or relationships with those who depend on us.
For sure. For sure. And it's like what you're saying, and this is part of the program that we're supporting our teams with, is like when we talk about creating our vision, it's like, how can we make sure, like, are you proud of the vision you've created and say your 2 objectives, your focus zones that you're working on? Because you publicly need to share them. Like, you need to share them with educators. You need to like say the why. Like, you have to bring them into the process of saying like, these matter because these are the things you were saying mattered. That public declaring, whether it's at the bottom of every email to the top of every staff meeting, like all that. It's, when you send out those parent newsletters and you have a section on math, it's in there because the public declaring is not only like great for what you're saying, right? Like, accountability, and it's harder to go back on our word because we're going to break trust. But what it is like you had to get so clear on what you really wanted to achieve to be able to publicly declare it that you now know what you're going to be working on. Like, it's a really important part of our 4-stage process in the flywheel because if you're that clear, you'll start to see gains in those areas just because you're saying we're measuring that. We're saying we're moving on, but the clarity there is helping you. But the public declarement automatically adds that level of accountability that we need. Because I think what you're saying is this is what I was thinking too, is like what you're saying is like, wherever I am, if I'm a coach, if I'm a coordinator, I'm an administrator, maybe I'm an assistant superintendent, maybe I'm a director of mathematics, like wherever I am, there are people around me that I'm accountable to and accountable for. And I have to include both of those people into this work. Otherwise, I risk that fragility. Because if I'm a coach and the whole program rests on my shoulders, and then I leave, or all of a sudden my boss switches, then all of a sudden we're in that same situation. But if I've brought them into the team aspect and I've shared and there's communication, it's like, because we always hear it's like, oh, my supervisor completely trusts me. I have full authority to do what I want, which sounds great, but it's the risk of the fragility. Bring them in, constant updates. This is where we are. Like they have to be accountable. You have to be accountable. You have to find those accountable partners to report to, share, so that you're building this ecosystem. You're building the culture of what this looks like. If I'm at the top, I'm the assistant superintendent who's like spearheading this work. This is my initiative that I know this is so important for mathematics improvement. You're right. Like, you're accountable to the public, right? You're accountable to the parents. You're accountable to the staff. Like, you have to publicly declare this is where we're trying to go. And anyone new can say, like, this is what we're doing. We've already declared this is our 5-year goal.
These are our big ideas today. I feel like the reason it's top of mind for us is because we do see districts experiencing these transitions. And again, some really successful situations where the transition is an opportunity. Like I said at the beginning, like change can be an opportunity. And it can be a way to invigorate and to re-inspire and to gain a new perspective. But we also want to take these steps in preparation to ensure that it doesn't derail the work that we've been doing, because then the flywheel has to stop and start all over again, and we lose the momentum.
Right. The constant conversations we have with our teams, because in our 4 stages, our 4-stage flywheel, the 4th stage is called inspiring growth, which is about how do we solve our traction problem, our sustainability problem? How do we build our next round of leaders? It influences the decisions we make in our vision, which is stage 1, in measures that we're measuring. And it influences decisions we make in optimizing our PD structures and how do we coordinate those, which is stage 2. It influences the decisions and how you structure the support to build capacity, which is stage 3. So like, we help teams weave, even though it's like we've articulated there's 4 stages, but it's more of a web, because it's like we help them decide on how are we making sure we're crowding the next round of leaders? How are we designing that math task force to help us do what we're trying to do, and it's not just on my shoulders and isolated? What are strategic ways to bring them in when I don't have a budget, or strategic ways to help them when we know that they have so many other things and there's so many competing initiatives? Like, what are the ways we can do that? Those are the conversations we're having with our teams every single day. So if you also are kind of thinking about how do we solve that problem and are looking for some guidance, head on over to makemathmoments.com/district. Hop on a call with us and we can talk our way through it, give you some suggestions. And we'll see you next time.